Welcome back. Well, we know now that both Atul Gupta and Rajesh Gupta are being held in Dubai, and that this is the result of our government's request for them to be extradited here for their alleged role in the state capture era. But also, we know that extradition can be a complicated process. Gary Eisenberg is an immigration lawyer and expert on issues around extradition. Gary, good afternoon to you. How difficult is it to extradite someone from another country?
Well, it could be very difficult. It depends on the quality of the legal representation in terms of, in this particular case, the domestic laws of the UAE. It really depends on the competence of the judges hearing the matter and how the courts work. So until such time as the Guptas or anybody else in their position in any other country exhaust their rights of appeal and review to the highest courts, time is always the judge of how difficult these extradition proceedings are for the requesting country to receive such individuals from overseas countries.
So we've seen, for example, in the Shepherd Bushiri case, there's been a court application there. I imagine there'll be an appeal process in Malawi. I would imagine Dubai will have something similar. You know, this would perhaps in the end have to go before a judge.
Yes, certainly. We must remember that the courts in Malawi are effectively and relatively less experienced in dealing with extradition matters than are the courts, for example, in a jurisdiction like the UAE, in Dubai. And those courts are very experienced in dealing with this type of matter. But we see in the Bushiri case the kind of technical points his legal team have been taking. For example, the giving of evidence by those who deposed to affidavits in South Africa to come and authenticate their affidavits in the Malawian court, and that's been a major sticking point. So all the way, it depends on the kinds of points that the legal team is able to take and the pronouncements of those judges installed to hear the matter.
Fascinating that Dubai may have more experience in extradition matters. Gary, is it easier to get a person from a third country than it is from their home country? In other words, the Guptas are citizens, as I understand it. Their home country is India, but they're in Dubai. Would it be easier, say, for a country to extradite me from, I don't know, France, rather than my home country, South Africa?
Well, it really depends on the domestic laws of those countries. For example, the extradition treaty between the UAE and South Africa stipulates that the UAE authorities can refuse an extradition if we are talking about a UAE national. The Russians don't extradite their own nationals, and other countries take the same view. South Africa is not similarly situated. South Africa will extradite its own nationals to foreign requesting parties, but other countries won't.
How important is the relationship between the two countries? So we have now signed an extradition agreement with Dubai. Is our relationship with them more important than any court process, or can it actually depend on really a large number of factors?
You raise a very intriguing issue. You know, in negotiating the extradition treaty with the UAE, we started in 2010, and only last year we exchanged ratification instruments. And in terms of time, the extradition treaty came into force, I think, in July 2021. Took us 11 or 12 years to achieve that. Second of all, South Africa and the UAE are parties to the UN Convention against corruption. And that has been since 2004, 2006. And that provides for the extradition of people like the Guptas. Article 44 of that UN convention allowed the UAE to extradite. There was no political will to do that. Now, in reading the history of this matter, especially as it concerns the Guptas since at least 2018, when they were alleged to have fled there, it's difficult to read the flavor, the political flavor of the UAE in its willingness to render mutual cooperation with South Africa in the apprehension of fugitives and the extradition of people hiding out there to answer criminal offences in South Africa. But time will tell.
Does it matter that the Guptas may have been living in Dubai? They may have, I'll say this, fled South Africa, Not quite sure why. It might have had something to do with the ANC conference in 2017, but they fled South Africa to Dubai. They've been living in Dubai before we actually signed the extradition instruments with them. In other words, there's generally a principle of law that a law doesn't apply retrospectively. It can't apply to things that happened before it was passed. Will that matter here?
No, you're perfectly correct. I mean, the red notice has been, as far as I understand, in circulation for about a year, or at least the last 6 months. There have been conflicting reports about the red notice, Interpol's intercession in apprehending these people. And it really does make no difference to the extradition or the arrest and extradition of the Guptas in terms of what time or which date the extradition treaty was entered into.
Gary Eisenberg, thank you so much. Immigration lawyer, expert on extradition. I have a sneaking suspicion we'll be calling on you for more around the Guptas as the process unfolds.